Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Outside Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Ebersole. I'm an agricultural consultant and also the co-founder of Big Sky Capital Group, where we invest in regenerative agriculture. We like to say we fix and flip farms and also ranches. Our guest today is a fairly new acquaintance for me. I came across her post on LinkedIn about how farming and the use of land can affect weather, and this topic has always been one that intrigued me greatly. She is a tech-driven strategist who advocates for regenerative agriculture, is working to empower sustainable land management with data-driven solutions that help increase climate resilience by implementing AI applications. Her name is Natalie Fleming, and she's from Idaho. Natalie, welcome to our podcast. How are you today?
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you here. So I'd like to just get into this a little bit. I don't know you real well, but I've enjoyed your posts on LinkedIn. And tell me a little bit, how did you get into regenerative ag, or what prompted you, or what sparked your interest in it?
Well, 50 years ago, my family had a ranch in California, not California. Actually, they did have one in California, and they sold it and bought 2,000 acres of high desert ranch in Christmas Valley, Oregon.
Oh, wow.
So we spent our summers in the high desert. And when we drove mom and grandma crazy, my two brothers and I, there were 7 kids at the time. And when we were the little kids, and we used to drive mom and grandma crazy. And so dad would just throw us in the truck, drive us out in the sagebrush and drop us off and say, pick up sticks, and then come back at dusk to pick us up. But it was incredibly dry and miserable, actually. Yeah. And I remember coming back to the trailers one day, and the center pivot had hit the road.
Uh-oh.
And there was a huge puddle in the road of water. And I was so excited because I thought, oh, we can go swimming in that. And we begged mom. I was like, Mom, when we get back, can we put on our swimsuits and go swim in that puddle? And she just kind of politely rolled her eyes and said, okay. So we drove back to the trailers, put on our swimsuits, and ran back to the puddle, and it was dried up.
Oh, wow.
So there was no swimming. So it was, high desert.
Yeah.
Then by the time I was 13, this was in the early 80s, they had lost the ranch, which, there was a lot of challenges for ranchers and farmers at the time. And our parents took us down to California to see the land we were supposed to inherit that was sold.
Oh, wow.
And it was the Shire, straight out of The Hobbit. It was beautiful, rolling hills. And my cousin called the cattle, her dairy cows, and they came over the meadow hillside and came into the dairy, and we rode horses in the tall grasses under the trees, and I was bitter.
What part of California was that?
That's in Grass Valley, California.
Okay.
So the contrast, if you look at your personal history and you look at your ecosystem history, where you came from, where you've been.
Yes.
And, living out west, we go on a lot of long drives when we go anywhere.
Yep.
And as a little girl, I used to see my imaginary horse following me along the car, riding beside the car. But then later I started really pondering, what can we do to convert, as I looked out into the fields, how do we convert all of this barren land into the Shire, into Grass Valley, California? But when I was a little girl, there was a lot of crises out at the ranch where, in the snow, in the winter, there was search parties to go find a family member or ranch workers who were, lost in the snow. I remember looking at my dad and asking him, well, Dad, who fed the bison? Who baled hay for the bison?
Yeah.
Yes. So, and, Alan Savory and Gabe Brown and all the others have answered that question of who baled the hay for the bison. Exactly. And I knew my dad was doing it the hard way. I didn't know what the new way was. And so I'm guessing it was about 10 years ago, I heard the Alan Savory TED Talk.
Oh, yeah.
That everybody's heard.
Yeah.
And I was really fascinated by it. There was an article written by either Salon or Slate magazine debunking it.
Oh.
And when they debunked it, they said, well, his test ground doesn't really count because they had a freakish 24% increase of rainfall. So it really doesn't count. And I thought, well, did he cause that? Yeah. And so I just, over time, I actually got into it through Facebook groups.
Yeah.
And I started asking questions. And I'm like, well, what in grazing what in how he managed the cows, the way he managed the
Yeah.
livestock, maximized vegetation. Was it the dust they kicked up? And I started asking questions about dust.
Yeah.
And then over the years, different friends like Stephen Rich, who was the champion 50 years ago on
Uh-huh.
all of this, started sending me bait articles,
Uh,
clickbait articles,
yeah.
and just drew me into this over time. And I'm deeply religious,
Yeah.
and we all have our own flavor of spirituality. And mine
Yes.
really focuses on how we're supposed to make the earth as a Garden of Eden.
Mhm.
How do we do that? How do we maximize the livability of different ecosystems? How do we green the deserts? And I I know there's people who love sagebrush, but I'm bitter. So
Yeah.
I'm bitter against sagebrush. So
Yep.
I've become a huge fan of people like Zach Weiss and Mark
Yeah.
Shepard and a great Greg Judy. And there's so many people who have done such wonderful things to learn about. And I'm fascinated. You hear the story of the farmer who plows the field
Uh-huh.
and then he sees the rain cloud coming
Uh-huh.
and it's raining. And then he gets up to his field and it stops raining.
Uh-huh.
Why? And I guess you said that you're a pilot. And
Yes.
so you know about the lift you get when
Yep.
I'm sure you know about getting a good lift from bare ground.
Yep.
And of course, learning from Walter Jenney about the water cycle from him and so many others. And I get so frustrated because living in the West, they because of drought conditions, they want to remove water.
Yeah.
They want to stop the use of water. And they keep saying, well, rip out your lawns and rip out the trees. And we watched California rip out orchards because they were using water.
Yeah.
But water's not used, water's cycled.
Yes.
And it's
Exactly.
an investment.
Yep.
And just like any investment, you have to be careful about what you invested in. And if you don't invest it, um, my grandma out at the ranch had buried uh, uh, coffee cans filled with silver coins and gold coins.
Oh, wow.
So, or hiding it under the mattress. People who
Yeah.
buried their money. I think not using water is like taking your cash and burying it in hiding it in your mattress in a time of inflation.
Yeah. You're not investing it. You're
Really,
just losing the value of it.
you're just losing the
Yep.
value of it. So, yeah. So it just really kind of drew me in,
Mhm.
and I'm also drawn by the human condition,
Mhm.
starvation, and hunger in the world.
Yes.
In the 80s, we heard a lot about Ethiopia in the 80s, and we had the videos of the children starving with fat bellies and flies on
Mhm.
their eyes.
Yep.
And I was deeply affected by that.
Yes.
And I felt personally responsible for that. And I remember saying, Mom, what do we do? And she just kind of looked at me like, no, that's something hopeless we can't fix.
Yeah.
And I've learned about people like Natalie Topa, who are traveling to refugee camps and planting the rain and building water structures. And by the time she leaves a refugee camp, she's turned it into the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah.
So
That,
this stuff excites me. We
yeah.
can
No,
feed the
I geek out
world.
on this stuff too. I love the idea of producing rainfall. Are you familiar with the guys down in Mexico? I think it's in the Chihuahua Desert.
Alejandro
That,
Carrillo, he is just amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
So I've done a couple short of my little promo videos,
Okay.
including his work.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, he's increased, he can see the radar on the radar. You can see the clouds forming over his ranch.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I worked in the seed business some too, and I worked with Green Cover Seed, and they had quite a bit of his research published, I think, in some of their documentation and some of their literature. And that's kind of where I first ran into it. And I found it very fascinating that I think it was two ranchers were able to actually increase the rainfall over their ranches. And their neighbors, I guess, kind of got a little jealous of them. They're like, "What? You're affecting the weather. You're taking rainfall away from us." It's like,
No,
no, we're creating our own rainfall.
yeah, that's the myth is they don't understand that, the cloud, it rains and then it evaporates and then the plants release aerosols that cloud seed it again to bring it back down again downwind.
Yeah.
So it's cycled kind of like a pinball machine. You don't need to worry about somebody taking the rain because if you do it right, you're going to cycle that rain over and over and over again as it passes through the landscape.
Yeah. And let's delve into that a little bit while we're talking about that. How does that process work? How does a rancher that, every rancher wants more rainfall, especially in the high plains and in the desert areas. What can they do? What are some of the first steps they can do to start this process?
Some of the first things. Well, of course, the cover cropping, the crimping, the keeping the ground, every inch of ground needs to be covered
Yes.
year round. And then you've got the multi-layer canopies, from grasses, trees. It depends on what you're doing. Are you doing annual crops? Are you doing perennial? Are you doing grazing? So if you're doing a grazing system, you want what's called silvopasture, which you integrate trees, shrubs with different grasses.
Yeah.
You want to maximize your biodiversity because every different variety of plant is going to release different aerosols. Now, all of them release Pseudomonas syringae, which cloud seeds. But then you've got pollens and spores and different bacteria.
Yeah.
So the more variety you have in your system, the more consistent your rainfall. I compare it to the orchard I had in my backyard.
Yeah.
My friend Cindy, she had one huge apple tree, huge, took up the whole backyard. And so she had this huge pile once a year of apples with worms that she was trying to get rid of, so all at once.
Yeah.
And then in my backyard, I did the espalier fruit trees along the fence line. So we have the open lawn, and then I had literally 23 trees back there.
Oh, okay.
And the goal was to have, you could have 3 peach trees, 3 cherry trees, and they all come in a different time and they're pruned back heavily.
Mm-hmm.
So you have consistent fruiting throughout the season.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so if you think of rainfall the same way, that there's different particles being released, you're going to have longer, consistent rainfall. So if you look at our forestry system, when we monocrop, when we replant, when we limit the varieties and replanting, we just plant trees instead of trees, vines, and inoculating for fungi.
Yeah.
So if you think of that in those terms, so your ranch, they have found that aquifers recharge best with a 30% canopy tree cover. So if you're doing the holistic grazing with your livestock, get somebody like Alejandro to bring in the trees too. That's beneficial for the livestock. They've got some shade. And you've got the dappled sunlight. You're going to be protected from the heavy winds that cause more evaporation. So you want as many layers as possible. So that's on the grazing system. You've got to bring in trees and you've got to bring in variety. And whether you want to do the full-blown alley grazing and do something intensive like Mark Shepherd, or a little bit more sparse like a savanna.
Yeah.
If you're doing annual cropping, there's a couple different models, several models I like. I love to see the crimping.
Okay. Yeah.
I wish I remember the name of the farmer that I have my favorite crimping. The crimping is great. There's a farmer by the name of Jason Mock that I love to follow.
I know Jason, actually.
You do know him. I love his farming method is so therapeutic for your OCD. Watching those perfect rows is just watching him drive and plow with the alternating stripes of his field are just beautiful. But I do believe he uses chemicals, but he's so good on the relay cropping. I'm just going to hold my tongue on his chemical use.
Well, and we find that too in transitioning guys to regenerative ag. You still have to use a little bit of chemical usage until you get to the point where you have a good crimping process, till you have a good, I work with Steve Groff too. I don't know if you know him, but he's actually on our board for our fund. So
is he the one where it has the beautiful pictures of him crimping?
It might be. He has the yellow crimper on the back. He actually uses a modified stalk chopper for crimping, which actually is a little more aggressive on things than some of these just roller crimpers. So
yeah, I think he's the one I was thinking of that I didn't know the name of, that has beautiful fields crimped down.
Yeah.
But so the biggest thing is just keeping the ground covered. And then I think, windrows and trees, the big thing is trees along the outside of the field. If you're not going to go straight up alley cropping, if you're not going to dive into the alley cropping in the silvopasture, at least at the very minimum on the borders of your fields, put those trees in, put in a variety. You need the deciduous trees, you need the everything.
Yep.
Especially, I'm really, really worried about the Palouse.
Oh, yes.
Northern Idaho, Eastern Washington. It is beautiful. I went to Moscow High School. Those beautiful rolling hills are glorious. And I look at them and I call it New Sahara.
Yeah.
Because if they have 1 or 2 seasons, you take out those dams in Oregon and Washington, you cut off that water supply downwind, you create more desert wet downwind, and you get that wind blowing, that those haboobs, those dust storms that they're having.
Yep.
Those really deeply scare me.
Yes, absolutely. And I've seen that dust
Yeah.
storm, one this summer, actually. So,
Yeah. And it's that, I call it New Sahara. You see those beautiful rolling hills. And if you go to photography of the Palouse on Facebook, that group, they have the most beautiful green rolling hills. And they look exactly like a green Sahara desert.
yes.
So if they go a season or two without rain, without irrigation or whatever, because they don't have to irrigate right now, you cut off the water supply downwind, and they're toast.
Yeah.
And an
I actually
entire
met
region will.
a gentleman from that area 10 years ago, 9 years ago, when I was working with Cover Crop Solutions and Steve Groff. John Asherman was his name. He actually farmed regeneratively in the Palouse long before anybody was doing it. And he tells the story as a boy, the mud washing off the hillsides and running through the house in the valley as high as the kitchen table and stuff like that. And they're kind of back into that space again. But that's what changed his mindset about it. And he started, no-tilling, started using cover crops, started retaining a lot of water. And in fact, he retained so much water on those hillsides, he was afraid he'd actually get mudslides. So he started planting corn in the Palouse. And everybody said, oh, there's no way you can plant corn in the Palouse. There's no, it's too dry. He planted 72-day corn in the Palouse just to suck the moisture out of the soil because he was retaining that much moisture. So it is possible. It is possible to farm regenerative in the Palouse.
Yeah. So yeah, the Palouse is something I've put some thought into, but I don't have all the definitive answers. At the very least, you've got to do the cover cropping, the no-till, and along the borders of the fields, get some good trees growing.
Yeah.
Both the the evergreens and the deciduous.
Yeah, the wind, get some wind protection, get some bioaerosols going on. So talk a little bit about, so a lot of people say, like the Sahara Desert kicks up a lot of dust.
Yeah.
If you're in Europe, I follow some guys in Europe and they talk about the red rain. It's raining the dust out of the sky. Everybody says, well, you got to have that dust to make rainfall in the Amazon. Debunk that or talk about that a little bit.
Okay. All right. So first of all, so the mineral aerosol, Cindy Morris, about every other post, I'm always putting a link to her 13-minute video.
Okay.
She's a microbiologist, and she's broken down the different aerosols. Remember, I started going down the aerosol rabbit hole when trying to figure out what Alan Savory was talking about the increase of rainfall.
Yeah.
So mineral dust is, compared to biological aerosols, is hydrophobic. So the South Atlantic Ocean has no hurricanes.
Yes.
You look on the hurricane map, they have like a couple tropical storms. They don't have hurricanes. The South Atlantic Ocean, you've got the Amazon rainforest on one side, and you've got the Central African, I don't know the proper name of the rainforest they have there.
Yeah.
And when you watch those aerosol videos, you can see the aerosols going back and forth, the biological green, the pollen, spores, bacterias going back and forth.
Yeah.
You don't need to steal dust from Africa. We don't need to, the Amazon rainforest will be fine without African dust.
Yeah.
So the temperatures, what these different particles do is they change the freezing temperature of water.
Yes.
We were all lied to in school. We weren't lied to. They just kept it simple.
Yeah.
The freezing temperature of water, dirty water, is 32 degrees.
Yeah.
The freezing temperature of pure, clean, not just straight up H2O, is negative 39, negative 40 degrees, both Celsius and Fahrenheit. That's where they cross over.
Yes.
And so in order for water to freeze, you need a catalyst to make it freeze at a warmer temperature. Biological aerosols, the protein structures mimic the structure of water.
Oh, interesting.
And then, here's a rabbit hole. Look up EZ, exclusion zone water, EZ water, exclusion zone water, and there's a TED Talk on it. And when you see the video, when it explains how when water is exposed to, biological cells, there's some weird thing with biology where it just lines up like a sergeant.
Interesting.
So the water responds very well to biological cell, the proteins. Mineral dust, it has to get 20 to 30 degrees colder in order to get ice nucleation. So rainfall is stimulated by the ice nucleation process at our latitudes. So when you have a cloud in the sky, in order for it to convert to a nice, cute little poofy cloud into an actual rain, it has to go through the ice nucleation process.
Yes. Yep.
So the biological aerosols will cause the rainfall at 20 to 30 degrees warmer than a mineral dust.
Okay.
So if you look at the North Atlantic Ocean, you can just see the dust just throwing hurricanes in the North Atlantic Ocean. And some of those hurricanes go all the way through, pass through Panama into the Pacific Ocean. And so the Saharan dust produces hurricanes all across the entire northern hemisphere.
Interesting.
Because it's suppressing that rainfall. So the more heat you have, the hotter the air is, the more water it holds. The more water it holds, the hotter it gets. And it just builds up and builds up and builds up. And that mineral dust is suppressing the rainfall action. And then once it gets over the humid ocean, it just explodes. So now,
and then it eventually builds up so big that it has to break, and that's when you get the hurricane.
Yeah, and when the same thing is happening coming the other direction from west to east. When you look at the hail map and the tornado map of the United States or the world, you see how the water's been suppressed across. When it crosses the west, it builds up, and then once it hits that zone where you have the humid east, you're getting the massive hailstones and you're getting the massive tornadoes. And so, if we green the west, which we could easily do in 10 to 15 years through planting mangroves along Baja California, do what Alejandro's doing, do what Groff is doing, even Jason Mock. If we green the West, then we can mitigate tornadoes. I think it's far more impactful than anything they're talking about as far as CO2 goes, because CO2 can increase temperatures 1 or 2 degrees over 20 years. And, but the aerosols have an immediate effect right now on the climate above because of their impact on the water. Water is supposed to be, according to Walter Jenny, water is 95% of the climate equation of the heat dynamics.
No, the water cycle is huge, and it's not been given its rightful place. It reminds me of a guy that I follow on YouTube. It's called Dust Up's Ranch. I don't know if you've come across this stuff. He bought 300 and some acres in extreme Southwest Texas, where it's like there's nobody around and it's just plain desert. And he's looking to turn it into a desert forest, and he's really struggling with it. But he's got a little bit of irrigation going. He has a guy living out there to kind of manage it and stuff. And they're actually starting to get stuff to grow out there. And it's going to be interesting to see, because he talks about like the mountains producing rainfall and it heads towards his land and then it all dissipates, stuff like that. So he's experiencing that. So
there's a lot of things you can do on a small scale. You've seen, have you seen the Earth Smiles? I think that's really been shown a lot on LinkedIn.
I don't think I've seen that one. No.
Okay, it's just like about 10 feet wide. You dig a moon shaped thing.
Okay, yes, I know what you're talking about
it
now.
It just traps the water as it runs off. Look up Earth Smiles.
Yeah.
And that's something you can do on a small scale. And then Zach Weiss, he does water retention landscapes to trap the water in.
Yeah.
And he is magnificent. He's just a beaver water god is what he is. He's the real Aquaman.
Interesting.
But that 24%, it was interesting. I was watching one of his programs and he popped out that number 24% again.
Yeah, we're interesting.
And of increase in rainfall. But he is able to just trap the water that falls. You got to trap the water that falls on your land. So you've got to be working on contour, slow spread and sink the water in wherever you have. Keep the water you get.
Yep.
And hopefully we can get some laws changed on that. Get some laws changed to allow us to trap our water on our land.
Well, we're getting to the end of this episode. I think we're going to go into a second one maybe, and we'll do that. But one last parting thought, maybe. What advice would you give to a farmer, let's just say in the high plains, eastern Colorado, Nebraska, Montana, somewhere like that? He's like, I want to start making more rainfall. What should he do? What should he start doing? You mentioned about retaining water. How does that look on a practical farm? Let's say a wheat farm.
A wheat farm?
Yeah.
Well, you got to be if you want to trap your on a wheat farm. If you're a crop in cropping, of course,
Yep.
what we said again, the low till no till
Yep.
again, build up that soil. Um, on contour again, you've got to plow on well, don't plow, but
Yeah.
work on contour.
Yeah.
And like I said, same advice really for the Palouse. Get some trees along the side, maybe do
Yeah.
some alley cropping. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
haven't lived there.
Yeah.
I haven't lived there, and I have pondered on it because
Mhm.
they do have limited rainfall.
Yep.
But definitely work on contour, bring in the trees,
Yep.
look at the wind direction, where the wind's blowing from, where it's blowing to.
Yep.
Trees are very understated as far as their powerful impact. You can see on the windrows, the dramatic where you just have one tree and then there's the downwind from that one tree. When you have the higher satellite image, you just a strip of green going
Yeah.
all the way from it downwind.
Yep.
So trees
Yep.
along the sides of your fields, or sometimes if you have to, split your field up a little bit
Yeah.
and put rows of trees between.
I worked with a few guys in those regions, and one of the things, obviously, they're practicing regenerative ag, which they've diversified their crop rotation. So they're doing at least 3 different types of cash crops. Started doing some cover cropping with some mixed success. Obviously, the dry years, it doesn't take off. Sometimes they had, some of them are irrigation, some are not, some are dry land. But it has made a difference when you see the yields of, say, their cowpeas or whatever, chickpeas that they grow. It's made a big difference in their yields. And these guys that I know of are using a lot of biological stimulants as well. So they're spraying a lot of those types of compost teas and things like that on. So it is possible to do it, but it is not easy. It is not easy.
I would definitely go back to what Jason Mock is doing on the
Yeah.
relay cropping,
Yeah.
where you're doing the different strips in the same field. I think that is a real game changer
Yeah.
to really trap in that water. He's
But
doing a great job.
it takes a different mindset. It really takes a shift in mindset.
Yeah, I think Jason tends to underestimate other. He's pretty smart, and
Yeah.
so I don't think he relates to the fact that other people aren't as smart as him how to do it.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
he's kind of, from what I've seen, he's got this. Oh, this is easy.
Well, he was kind of funny. He left the farm. I think he has a marketing degree. Ran a landscaping or golfing management company or lawn care company or something. And then I think his father passed away, and then he came back to the farm. And so he came back with a totally different mindset to farming. And that's one of the things we see even from our investment side. We have the average age of farmers being 60 years old, having struggled for many years, not having the capital to even try and make the shift. That's the difficult part. And that's where our whole fun thing comes in, that we want to try and help that. We want to invest in those types of people that say, hey, I'd love to try something different. I'd love to make a difference. How do we do it? So anyway.
Yeah, well, the thing is about the dirt, even though I complained miserably about my hardships in my childhood,
Yeah.
once you get that dirt under your fingernails, there's just such a love of the
Yeah.
land. And
Yeah.
I think I personally never feel more alive than when I'm out there, bucking hay or whatever,
Yeah.
Just that it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
It's more compulsive. You feel drawn to it.
Yeah.
And I really feel sad that this generation hasn't had that experience.
Yes. No, I grew up
That draw.
unloading
the
hay
dirt.
wagons and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
well, it's a pleasure. I want to continue this conversation, but I'm going to wrap up this episode, I think. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about weather and bioaerosols and things. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn and social media, so if you can
Okay.
find me on LinkedIn's probably best. I tend to be fairly unprofessional on Facebook, but LinkedIn's a great way to contact me.
Okay, LinkedIn. Natalie Fleming on LinkedIn. Everybody, thank you so much, Natalie. We're going to continue this conversation, but for today, that wraps it up. Thanks again, everybody, for your subscription. This podcast will be available wherever you get podcasts. So we look forward to the next one, and we'll see you later.